Hey, I'm Brian, and I just picked up this computer for only 20 euros. And it's supposed to have an Intel Core i5, 4GB of RAM, and a 500GB hard drive. But how good can a computer for this amount of money possibly be? So let's first remove the screws of this case. I haven't opened it up yet myself, so I don't really know what is inside, what we're going to find. And the screw threading already is really helpful and seems to not be working. And the last screw is off. So let's open this up and see what we find find inside. So as you can see, this is definitely an Intel CPU, and it also looks like an 1150 something socket, so we probably weren't screwed over with that. And it's an ASUS motherboard, something that I wouldn't have expected for only 20 euros. And the RAM is also from Corsair. Let's look at how much this is. So these appear to be 2GB modules, so 2 by 2. That means 4GB of RAM, and this is Corsair RAM, also a brand component, which again I wouldn't have expected for only 20 euros. Especially because most of these OEM computers come with custom, very cheaply made parts. But as this is not a PC from Dell, for example, it is kind of to be expected that they don't use their own components. So the hard drive is a Western Digital Caviar Blue with 500GB. So now I think we can get to removing the CPU cooler and see what CPU we got. So this is an Intel Core i5-6500. That is unfortunately a dual core chip, and it's 1156, so it's the first generation of Intel Core CPUs. But in the first generation only the dual core chips had integrated graphics, which now kind of makes sense. But I think still an Intel Core i5 with 2 cores and hyperthreading, 4GB of RAM, an ASUS motherboard that has 6 SATA ports, and even a PCI Express slot that you could technically use for a graphics card, though in a half-height chassis like this that would probably be very difficult, and also a Western Digital 500GB hard drive seem like very good components for only 20 euros. There's also a DVD burner up here, and a 250 watt power supply that doesn't seem like it's from a very reliable brand. It's also not A+ rated or anything, so that is maybe not the best component in this whole computer. But overall, I think that it may have been a good deal. So we just applied new thermal paste on the CPU, and we also loaded up a fresh copy of Windows 7, as we want to round out any driver issues that could come up with Windows 10, as this is a very old platform. So the first gen Intel integrated graphics really doesn't make that good of an impression in games. You can play older casual titles like Super Meat Boy or Portal just fine, but even older AAA titles like Tomb Raider 2013 are completely unplayable even at the lowest settings. We don't even want to speak of newer titles. So a dedicated GPU would definitely be a great addition for the PCI Express slot on this computer, though you are severely limited in your choice of GPU because this is only a half-height chassis. The CPU performance looks way better than that, though it's also nothing spectacular. It's around comparable to an AMD quad-core APU from the current generation, so it's not that great, but definitely usable. And the price-to-performance ratio doesn't even look that bad when you consider that CPUs with 2 or 3 times the performance can cost up to 10 times as much as you paid for this whole system. So those benchmarks don't look the best, but that is to be expected from this old hardware. And it's also only a dual-core CPU with 4GB of RAM and no dedicated GPU, so these results really were to be expected. But still, for 20 euros or $25, this seems like a pretty good deal, especially because the Raspberry Pi only has a quarter of the performance of this computer and costs 15 bucks more. And you also get a full desktop computer here that you can upgrade to some extent. It's not that nice that this isn't a full-size chassis. But the hardware in it is still really nice with brand components, which wouldn't have been to be expected with such an OEM low-cost computer. Now you probably ask yourself where I got this computer for this cheap. And the answer is from a local school. That's because schools, universities, or even companies usually throw out very old computers for very cheap, because they don't have the resources to sell them for the price that they would actually be worth. And that way you can actually snag up pretty good deals with the computers that you can get there. This of course was a pretty low price, but the hardware also was compliant with that. If you spend a little more, maybe you can even get a quad-core i5 processor from the 2nd generation or so. That would be definitely a lot more capable than this one. But even if you don't have use for such a low performance computer, as I also don't, you can also still sell it for a lot more than what you paid for it, because you know what the components in it are actually worth. And that is also what I'm probably going to do with this computer. Now with that, I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, you know there are 1 or 2 buttons under it that you can press, and you should also press that follow button on Twitter to stay updated. I'm Brian, and I'd like to thank you all for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!